They were in our living rooms, our childhoods, then vanished like ghosts, without a single goodbye. What really happened to the stars we thought we'd never lose? There was a time in the 1990s when Jonathan Taylor Thomas was not just a name. He was the face on every magazine cover, the poster on thousands of bedroom walls, and the voice behind a Disney lion that made us cry. He was the boy next door who also happened to be the brightest star on one of the most beloved shows of the decade. Home Improvement turned him into a household name, and his role as young Simba in The Lion King cemented his place in pop culture forever. But then, just as fast as he rose, he disappeared. No scandal, no farewell tour, no teary press conference, just gone. When he stepped away from the spotlight in the early 2000s, the headlines were confused. Some said he wanted to pursue education. Others claimed he was disillusioned with fame. The truth was quieter than any tabloid fantasy. Jonathan wanted something simple, normalcy. He enrolled in college, studied philosophy, history, and literature. He was seen on a campus bench more often than on a red carpet. For someone who had played so many characters, it seems the role he longed for most was just being himself. What is most haunting is that his departure was not dramatic. It was careful, intentional. He made cameos here and there, small glimmers that reminded us of what once was, but never enough to call it a return. Maybe that was the point. Maybe Jonathan Taylor Thomas knew something we did not, that some stars shine brightest before they vanish. And maybe he wanted us to remember him exactly as he was, mid-laugh on a family sitcom, frozen in time before the world asked too much. Mara Wilson did not just play magical girls, she was one. To anyone growing up in the 90s, she was the bright-eyed child who brought life to characters we adored. Whether she was teaching a cruel headmistress a lesson in Matilda or navigating grief in Mrs. Doubtfire, Mara had a presence that was impossible to ignore. She had a warmth that could cut through any screen and land softly in your heart. And then, almost overnight, she was gone. Not fallen, not broken, just elsewhere. As it turns out, Hollywood was not the sanctuary it pretended to be. Mara's decision to leave was not sudden, but it was necessary. The industry that once celebrated her began to suffocate her. By the time she was a teenager, acting felt more like a performance off-screen than on. She was growing up in a space that did not allow her to grow. So she walked away. From the lights, the scripts, the expectations, and toward something truer. Mara became a writer, an advocate, a voice for children who never had one. She opened up about mental health, grief, and what it meant to be a child star when the cameras stopped rolling. And while we lost her as an actress, we gained her as a witness to a world most of us never see. The one behind the curtain, the one without the glitter. Her words became a new kind of performance, honest, brave, and often heartbreaking. Some child stars fade because the world forgets them. Mara chose to disappear because she remembered herself, and in doing so, she showed us that there is life after the applause ends, a life of purpose, of survival, of healing. That might be the greatest role she has ever played. Jake Lloyd should have been remembered as a legend. After all, how many children can say they played Anakin Skywalker in one of the most anticipated films in cinema history? But instead of being celebrated, Jake became a warning. Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace introduced the world to young Anakin, but it also introduced Jake to something far more dangerous than Sith Lords. Fame at that level was not a dream, it was a trap. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Critics tore into the film, viewers mocked his performance, kids at school bullied him relentlessly. Jake was not just ridiculed, he was targeted. The line between character and child was blurred so harshly that the person underneath began to vanish. He was only 10 years old, 10, and instead of protecting him, the industry left him behind. He did not just quit acting, he rejected it entirely. He destroyed his film memorabilia. He spoke of how toxic his experience had been. He wanted nothing to do with the world that had once promised him everything. In the years that followed, Jake struggled. With mental health, with the weight of a childhood that was not his own. There were moments of hope, followed by stories that made headlines for the wrong reasons. But none of them changed the core truth. He was a boy who never asked for the world to know his name, and when they did, it cost him everything. There is something deeply unfair about his story. A role that should have launched him into a lifetime of success became the reason he walked away, or maybe ran. And now, all we are left with is silence and the question of what could have been. Lisa Jakub was the girl you could believe in, the rebellious daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire, the panicked teen in Independence Day. She had a rare kind of authenticity that made every character feel personal. She was never the loudest in the room. She was the realest. But sometimes the realest ones are the first to realize that something is wrong. Lisa's exit from Hollywood was not a scandal. It was a quiet refusal, a soft rebellion, a truth spoken out loud. By age 14, she was told she could not return to her school because filming conflicted with attendance. Robin Williams even wrote a letter to try to help her stay. But the message was clear. Being an actor meant choosing performance over personhood. Lisa never forgot that. The dissonance between who she was and who she was paid to be grew louder with every role. Eventually, she chose to leave. She moved away from the industry toward a life that made more sense. Writing, advocating, healing. Like Mara Wilson, Lisa began to speak openly about anxiety, trauma, and the quiet devastation of child fame. Her memoir, You Look Like That Girl, does not glamorize the past. It reclaims it. It turns a fading spotlight into a candle, gentle, true, and still burning. We remember her face from film, but it is her voice in print that lingers longer now. And maybe that is the story beneath the story, that sometimes disappearing is not vanishing. It is transforming. It is taking your own name back. Michael Oliver was the kind of kid who could turn chaos into comedy. As Junior in Problem Child, he was everything the title promised. Wild, loud, hilarious, and just a little dangerous. He was not your typical sweet-faced Hollywood kid. He was a troublemaker you could not help but love. And then, like the perfect punchline to a joke we did not see coming, he was gone. His exit was sudden, but the signs were always there. The Problem Child films made money, but they also made problems. Legal disputes, managerial chaos, allegations of financial exploitation. Behind the scenes, Michael's world was unraveling before it even had a chance to begin. By the time he was a teenager, the industry had already burned him out. He did not just step away, he stepped back into anonymity. And he has rarely looked back. Today, Michael lives far from Hollywood's orbit. He is not trying to reclaim fame. He is not on reality shows or writing tell-all books. He is just living, quietly, on his terms. And that silence says more than any interview could. It says he chose peace over applause, privacy over profit. That, maybe the only happy ending left for a child actor, is to become someone the world forgets. It is easy to think of these stars as lost, but maybe they are not lost at all. Maybe they just escaped. And in Michael's case, maybe disappearing was the bravest thing he ever did. Mike Vitar was the kind of kid who made every summer feel like it could last forever. As Benny the Jet Rodriguez in The Sandlot, he was a symbol of speed, freedom, and the unbreakable magic of childhood friendship. And in the Mighty Ducks sequels, he brought that same fire to the ice. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming memories, the kind that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. But somewhere between the bases and the blue lines, Mike disappeared. There was no farewell press tour, no dramatic scandal, just a quiet exit in the late 1990s, as if he had run the bases one last time and never looked back. While the world was still quoting his lines and wearing Sandlot t-shirts, Mike was stepping into a new uniform, one that would define the rest of his life. He became a firefighter, a real one, not a role, not a scene, a life-risking, people-saving, dawn to dusk kind of job. It is the kind of pivot that tells you something about who he truly was. Fame might have found him, but it never changed him. And while the industry kept calling, Mike had already answered a different kind of call. There is something poetic about that. A child star walking away not out of failure but out of purpose. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to matter. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels less like a loss and more like a story we were lucky to witness, even if only for a while. Because some heroes do not wear costumes on screen. Some wear helmets and carry hoses. Eric Sullivan was the kind of weird you wished you could be. As Dewey on Malcolm in the Middle, he stole every scene without ever trying. He was odd, unfiltered, a little too smart, and strangely wise beyond his years. You never quite knew what he would say next, and that was the charm. In a show packed with chaos and punchlines, Dewey was the quiet chaos, the unexpected storm. And then, just like that, Eric faded into the silence. When the series ended, so did his career. Not with a bang, but with an empty space where we thought he would be. There were no major interviews, no public breakdowns, just Eric, disappearing into the backdrop of real life. He made a couple of small appearances in the early 2000s, but nothing that felt like a return. And after a certain point, the world stopped asking when we would see him again. Because deep down, we knew the answer. Rumors have swirled, speculation has followed, but Eric has never stepped back into the spotlight to explain. And maybe he does not owe us that. Maybe his silence is its own kind of message, that life does not always need to be performed, that not every story gets a sequel. Sometimes the curtain falls and the actor just walks away. But there is something haunting about it, something unfinished. Because Dewey was not just a character. He was a mirror to the strange, fragile, brilliant side of being a kid. And the boy behind him? He chose something that most child stars never get. Anonymity, peace, privacy, a life off stage. Jeff Cohen gave us one of the most unforgettable performances in 80s cinema, and he did it with a belly, a scream, and a dance. As Chunk in the Goonies, he was the heart of a generation's favorite misfit crew. He was not cool, not slick, not heroic in the classic sense, but he was real, and that made him unforgettable. The Truffle Shuffle became legend, and so did Jeff. But then, nothing. After the Goonies, Jeff Cohen quietly left the screen behind. No chase for bigger roles, no desperate clinging to fame. Instead, he did something few expected. He reinvented himself. While Hollywood was busy trying to fit him into boxes he had already outgrown, Jeff walked away and studied law. He became an entertainment lawyer, not a punchline, not a sidekick, a force. Today, he is behind the scenes, navigating contracts instead of scripts, protecting artists instead of performing as one. And the irony is beautiful. The kid who once had to shout to be heard now helps others speak for themselves. He is powerful, respected, and deeply grounded in the very industry that once tried to define him. His story is not just about transformation. It is about reclaiming identity, about proving that child actors are not frozen in time. They grow, they evolve, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is trade the spotlight for something quieter, but just as impactful. Jeff Cohen did not just disappear. He became something more. Taran Noah Smith was the youngest son in Home Improvement, the awkward, often forgotten middle child of the Taylor family. He grew up on screen, his voice deepening as the seasons passed, his expressions maturing as America watched from their living rooms. But behind the jokes and tool puns was a boy who never asked for any of it. Fame was something that happened to him, never something he chased. When the show ended, Taran was just 17 years old. He did not celebrate his Hollywood success. He walked away from it, completely. He distanced himself from the industry, from the money, from the spotlight. Instead, he turned towards something far more grounded: veganism, sustainable living, building homes with alternative materials, and running a food company that served organic meals to schools. While others searched for ways back into television, Taran planted his feet firmly in the soil, literally. His story is not flashy, it is not headline-grabbing, but it is powerful. He has spoken about how alienating childhood fame can be, how it distorts your sense of self, your future, your place in the world. Taran did not want to be remembered for punchlines or reruns. He wanted to build something real. And while the world may have forgotten his name, it is clear he never forgot who he was. There is something beautiful about a child star who grows up and becomes exactly who they needed when they were young. Taran Noah Smith disappeared from our screens, but maybe that is because he found a better way to show up in the world. Danny Lloyd gave one of the most iconic performances in horror history, before he even knew what horror was. As little Danny Torrance in The Shining, he whispered red rum into our nightmares and stared blankly into a future he could not escape. But off-camera, Danny Lloyd was not haunted. He was just a child with a quiet voice and a curious mind. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not chase the fame. He simply went home. He was only 6 years old when Stanley Kubrick cast him. Kubrick famously shielded him from the darker parts of the film, never letting him realize just how terrifying his role was. That protection became prophetic. Because after one more acting job, Danny Lloyd left Hollywood entirely. No talk shows, no press tours, no desperate clinging to a child role, just a vanishing act that felt almost supernatural. He became a biology professor, a husband, a father. He spent decades away from the limelight, content to live in a world where no one recognized his face, only his kindness. When he finally gave an interview years later, it was not to reclaim fame, but to reflect on how grateful he was for a normal life, one where he could grow up, finish school, and become someone beyond the boy who rode a tricycle through a haunted hotel. It is easy to forget that behind every iconic child role is a real child. And sometimes, the best twist in a horror story is that the kid made it out, safe, happy, whole. Danny Lloyd disappeared, but not because he was lost, because he was found. Charles Herbert was not just a child actor, he was the child actor of the 1950s. With over 40 feature films and dozens of television appearances before the age of 16, he was a household name at a time when television was still earning its place in the American living room. Audiences adored him. Studios wanted more of him. And like so many before and after, Charles gave the world every bit of himself before he was old enough to realize what that meant. But the applause that lifted him up became the silence that swallowed him. As he grew older, the roles dried up. His voice changed, his face matured, and suddenly the golden boy of the silver screen was just another forgotten teenager. The transition from child star to adult actor is a narrow bridge few can cross, and Charles slipped through the cracks. The phone stopped ringing. The fan letters stopped coming. The boy who had once earned more than his own parents now found himself struggling to survive. He spoke, later in life, with haunting honesty about the pain of growing up in the spotlight, about being used, managed, and then left behind. He battled addiction, faced poverty, and for years, he vanished from the public eye. But unlike many who disappear in silence, Charles eventually came back, not to act, but to tell his story, to warn others. He never blamed the audience. He never lashed out at the industry. He simply revealed the truth, that childhood is not a commodity. And fame, especially when given to a child, is never a gift without cost. Charles Herbert did not just disappear. He faded, slowly, quietly, and with more grace than the world ever gave him. Dana Plato was America's big sister. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she brought heart, warmth, and grace to a sitcom that dared to tackle hard truths. She smiled through the screen like someone who had it all together, but the truth behind her eyes told a different story. Fame came quickly, too quickly, and it never taught her how to hold on to herself. After Different Strokes, the offers stopped. The industry moved on. Dana did not. She fought hard to stay relevant, to find herself in a world that had already moved past her. Her choices became more desperate. She posed for tabloids, took roles she would rather forget. And all the while, the girl who once made us laugh was slowly unraveling. Addiction wrapped around her like a shadow she could not shake. She tried to get clean, tried to come back. But the pressure of being famous and forgotten is its own kind of poison. By 34, Dana Plato was gone. A tragic overdose ended her life, and with it, a chapter of television history that still feels unfinished. She died just a day after telling a radio show she was finally turning things around. We like to believe child stars live charmed lives. Dana reminded us that charm can be a mask, that behind every laugh track there might be a cry for help we cannot hear. Her story is not just a cautionary tale, it is a heartbreak that never quite stopped echoing. Jimmy McNichol was not just a teen idol, he was the teen idol of the late 1970s. He had the hair, the smile, the voice, and the kind of effortless charisma that made girls scream and casting directors scramble. He starred in films, television, and even had a short-lived music career with his sister Christie. But just when it seemed like he was destined to become a permanent fixture in pop culture, Jimmy did something nobody expected. He walked away. By the early 1990s, Jimmy had stepped back from acting completely. Not because the roles stopped coming, not because of scandal, but because he wanted something deeper than fame could offer. He turned to environmental advocacy and real estate, dedicating his life to causes that had nothing to do with cameras or red carpets. It was not a retreat, it was a rebirth. You have to understand what that means. To walk away at the height of popularity, to say no to the world's applause and yes to your own quiet purpose. Jimmy could have tried to stay in the spotlight forever. He could have milked his fame into middle age. Instead, he chose a life rooted in service, sustainability, and simplicity. Today, he lives peacefully, far from the noise of the industry that once adored him. He still speaks occasionally about his past, but never with bitterness, just gratitude. And maybe that is the lesson here, that some disappearances are not a fall. They are a return to solid ground. Quinn Cummings was never the kind of child star who felt like a product. She was sharp, sincere, self-aware in a way that made her Oscar-nominated performance in The Goodbye Girl feel like more than just acting. It felt like truth. She was the clever kid who said what the adults were too afraid to, but even at her brightest, Quinn was already seeing through the glitter. She left acting before the industry could wear her down, before the roles dried up, before she became someone she did not recognize. Instead, she did something rare. She left on her own terms. Quinn became a writer, an entrepreneur, a commentator. Her essays cut like glass, funny, brutally honest, always thoughtful. She spoke openly about the absurdities of fame, parenting, and growing up in a world obsessed with image. Her exit was not a mystery. It was a declaration that her identity was not tied to box office numbers or red carpets, that she could be more. And she was. She built a second career from intellect and integrity, not nostalgia. In a culture that often devours its young, Quinn Cummings walked away with her voice intact. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of disappearance, the one that becomes a transformation. She is not gone. She is just somewhere better, somewhere real. Jane Withers had a smile that could knock you sideways. In the 1930s, she was one of the most bankable child stars in Hollywood. Funny, spirited, and unmistakably bold. She lit up the screen in a way few kids ever could, and for a while, she seemed unstoppable. But by the time she was in her teens, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She retired. Jane stepped away from the spotlight while she was still beloved, while she could still call the shots, and for decades it seemed like she had vanished. But Jane never truly left the industry. She just shifted. She returned years later, not as a starlet, but as a character actor and voice performer. She reinvented herself quietly, steadily, and with an incredible sense of grace. Most of her later fans knew her not as the little firecracker from the 1930s, but as Josephine the plumber from television commercials in the 1960s. That is how versatile she was, able to charm audiences across generations without clinging to old glories. She was not trying to be a child star forever. She was just trying to be Jane. Her journey is not one of heartbreak, but evolution. Jane Withers reminds us that disappearing is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is an act of wisdom, of timing, of knowing when to step back and when to reappear with something new to offer. Carrie Henn was not an actress. She was a memory. At just 10 years old, she gave one of the most hauntingly beautiful performances in science fiction history as Newt in Aliens. Her wide eyes, her whispers in the dark, her terrified strength, it all felt heartbreakingly real. And maybe that is because it was. Carrie was not a polished child star. She was a regular girl who landed a once-in-a-lifetime role. And after the lights dimmed, she never looked back. Most child actors would have chased more roles, tried to extend their moment. Carrie chose the opposite. She walked away from Hollywood and never returned. No sitcom appearances, no awkward teen comedies. She grew up, earned a degree, and became a teacher. While fans kept Newt alive through conventions and tributes, Carrie Henn lived a life far from the red carpet. Not out of failure, but out of choice. And what a choice it was. She has spoken warmly about her experience on set, about Sigourney Weaver becoming like family, about the magic of being part of something so iconic. But acting was never her dream. It was just a story she stepped into once, then stepped out of, just as gracefully. There is something sacred about that, about knowing when one chapter is enough. Carrie Henn reminds us that disappearing is not always erasing. It is just closing the book at the right time. Amanda Bynes made us laugh when laughter felt simple. From All That to The Amanda Show, she carried an entire generation's sense of humor on her back. She was magnetic, quick, sharp, and brilliantly expressive. For every child of the late 90s and early 2000s, Amanda was not just a star. She was the moment. And then, one day, the smiles stopped coming. The world watched as Amanda's story began to shift. Headlines replaced punchlines. Her brilliance began unraveling in front of millions. Social media, paparazzi, cruel late-night jokes, it all became part of her unraveling. Mental health challenges took center stage, and the industry that once cheered for her now seemed to look away. But Amanda never gave up. She stepped out of the spotlight and into treatment. She focused on healing, on education, even enrolling in fashion school. She spoke about her struggles with painful honesty, never pretending things were easier than they were. It was raw, it was heartbreaking, and it was real. Today, she keeps a low profile, trying to rebuild something private and safe. The child who once lit up screens is now simply trying to find peace. And maybe that is the bravest role of all, not the comeback, but the quiet. Amanda Bynes may have vanished from our screens, but she never stopped mattering. Corey Haim did not just define the 80s, he was the 80s. With his wild grin and soft vulnerability, he was the teen idol who made every awkward kid feel seen. The Lost Boys, Lucas, License to Drive, he was everywhere. And yet at the height of his fame, Corey was already crumbling. The camera loved him. The system did not. Addiction found him early. Fame made it easier to hide. The sparkle that once made him shine started to look like a warning light no one wanted to notice. He tried to get clean, again and again. But the weight of being a star before you are even fully formed, it never really leaves. His friendship with Corey Feldman became its own tragic echo. Two kids trying to survive an industry that offered no protection. Corey Haim wanted so badly to be okay. You could see it in his interviews, in the way he talked about his childhood, about how he missed being a person, not a product. In 2010, he died from complications related to pneumonia. But everyone knew that the long war with addiction had written the earlier chapters. He was just 38, a boy frozen in time, never really given the space to grow up before the world asked too much of him. Corey Haim disappeared long before he died, and that may be the saddest part of all. Haley Joel Osment saw dead people, and then he saw no one. As the wide-eyed child in The Sixth Sense, he stunned the world. Critics, Audiences, directors, everyone called him a prodigy. And for a while, he lived up to every inch of it, role after role, award after award. But then, the industry did what it always does. It moved on. Or maybe Haley did first. He made the boldest move a child star can make. He disappeared by choice, not by scandal. In doing so, he proved that fame did not own him, even when the world tried to claim him. Instead of chasing fame into his teenage years, Haley made a decision most child stars never even consider. He stepped away, went to college, lived among classmates who barely knew he had once terrified Bruce Willis on screen. He studied acting not to keep the fame alive, but to understand it better, to rebuild it on his own terms. And when he did return, it was not as the fresh-faced boy we remembered. It was as a character actor, bearded, funny, strange. He leaned into roles that were bizarre, offbeat, sometimes unrecognizable, and maybe that was the point. He had no interest in being who we remembered. He wanted to be someone new. Haley never really disappeared. He transformed, quietly, with grace. He avoided the crash, the scandal, the tragedy. And somehow, that made him stand out even more. In a world of child stars who vanish under the weight of what they were, Haley Joel Osment simply chose to become something else. Anissa Jones was sunshine trapped in a little girl's voice. As Buffy on Family Affair, she was the sweet-hearted soul of a show built on charm and innocence. America fell in love with her instantly. She made the impossible seem possible, that a child could carry the emotional weight of an entire series. And then, just as fast as she arrived, she was gone. She did not get the safety net she deserved, just the spotlight and then the silence. Her fame had an expiration date, but the trauma it left behind did not. After Family Affair ended, Anissa struggled to find new roles. She tried to return to school, tried to live like a normal teen, but the world would not let her. The fame she had earned so young had now become a cage. The pressure to stay perfect, the judgment for simply growing up, and worst of all, the silence from the people who once fought to cast her. By her mid-teens, she was already adrift, experimenting with drugs, battling depression. In 1976, at just 18 years old, Anissa Jones died of a drug overdose. The coroner called it one of the most severe cases they had ever seen. But for those who knew her story, it was not shocking. It was devastating, but not surprising. She had been failed by the system, by the adults around her, by a world that used her smile and discarded her soul. Anissa Jones should have grown up to play more roles, to become a woman, not just a memory. Instead, she became a symbol of what happens when fame outgrows the child it was built on. Her voice still echoes in the minds of those who watched her, a voice full of sweetness, pain, and longing, a voice that said goodbye before she ever had the chance to. You would think that turning one of the most successful comedies of all time into a television show would be a sure thing. But Delta House proved just how quickly lightning can escape the bottle. Based on the hit movie Animal House, this series tried to translate the chaos, raunch, and rebellion of the big screen into a weekly sitcom, only now under the watchful eye of network censors. And it showed. Gone were the wild parties, the edge, and the sense of danger. What remained was a watered-down echo of what once made people howl with laughter. Some of the original cast returned, including John Vernon as the uptight Dean Wormer, but without John Belushi's magnetic presence, the show felt like a tribute act. The humor was neutered. The stories went nowhere. ABC hoped that the mere association with the movie would be enough to draw in fans, but those fans were not fooled. This was not the Animal House they remembered. Ratings started strong but fell quickly. The characters, once riotous and wild, now felt flat and safe. Within 13 episodes, the show was off the air. Critics called it forgettable. Even the network seemed eager to move on. Delta House became another example of how television sometimes strangles the very spirit it hopes to bottle. You cannot fake irreverence, and you definitely cannot sanitize rebellion. Today, it is a curiosity, remembered mostly by die-hard fans and trivia buffs, a show that tried to cash in on chaos and wound up lost in the quiet. In a sea of over-the-top teen dramas and goofy comedies, the mystery files of Shelby Woo stood out by being both grounded and bold. Shelby Woo was not a pop star or a secret princess. She was just a smart, curious teenager with a badge-shaped dream and a knack for uncovering the truth. Set in a sleepy Florida town, the show followed Shelby as she interned at the local police department while juggling school, friendships, and all the usual teenage trials. But Shelby's world was not just locker notes and after-school crushes. It was suspects, clues, and dead ends. She was relentless, observant, brave, and most importantly, she listened. It was not just about solving mysteries. It was about learning who you are when no one else sees you clearly. Shelby's quiet tenacity made her a role model for kids who felt underestimated, unseen, or overlooked. Where other shows gave us caricatures of teens, Shelby Woo gave us someone who felt real. Not perfect, not invincible, just determined. The show had a quiet confidence to it. It did not rely on special effects or trendy lingo. It let the stories carry the weight. It gave kids the benefit of the doubt that they could handle mystery, complexity, and moral ambiguity, that maybe they wanted more than just punchlines. Shelby broke the mold not by being loud, but by being thoughtful. She was proof that curiosity could be cool, that asking questions could be power. The series slowly faded from the spotlight as flashier content took over, but it left behind something rare, a girl detective who did not need to be superhuman to be unforgettable. Prophet was not just ahead of its time, it felt like it had fallen in from another dimension. Airing briefly in 1996, the show followed Jim Prophet, a cold, calculating corporate executive who manipulated everyone around him to rise through the ranks. He slept in a cardboard box, spoke directly to the camera, and treated his job like a game of psychological warfare. Audiences did not know what to make of it. This was the same decade that gave us Friends and Frasier, shows built on warmth, laughter, and ensemble charm. Prophet was the opposite. It was cold, cynical, and daring. Too daring. It was canceled after only a few episodes, with critics divided and networks scared. He was the snake in the boardroom, charismatic, empty-eyed, and terrifyingly believable. The show didn't just critique capitalism, it made you feel complicit in it. It asked the kind of questions no one wanted to answer, especially during prime time. But years later, something strange happened. Prophet developed a cult following. People began to see it as the prototype for the morally ambiguous anti-heroes who would define television in the 2000s, characters like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, and Walter White. In hindsight, it was not just edgy for the sake of it. It was visionary. The show explored themes of corporate corruption, trauma, and identity with unsettling depth. And Adrian Pasdar's performance as Prophet remains chilling and magnetic. It was television holding up a mirror to ambition and daring us not to look away. But in 1996, America blinked, and the show was gone. Still, the mark it left has never fully faded. What happens when a television show pushes the boundaries so far that it disappears before anyone can even finish watching it? That is exactly what happened with Turn On, a sketch comedy experiment that went down in history for being canceled mid-broadcast. Designed to be cutting-edge and experimental, it was supposed to capture the wild, liberated spirit of the late 1960s. But what it delivered was an avalanche of rapid-fire, computer-paced sketches with no host, no breaks, and no laughs. Its minimalist set and jarring edits made viewers feel like they were trapped in a sterile, alien world. Jokes flew by so quickly and with such little coherence that audiences could barely understand them, let alone enjoy them. Affiliates were horrified. Several stations pulled the plug before the first episode ended. Sponsors backed out almost immediately. Viewer complaints flooded in, not just about the show's content, but about its tone, cold, clinical, and deeply unsettling. In a world still warmed by the Carol Burnett Show and the comforting rhythm of variety television, Turn On felt like a slap to the face. The backlash was swift, and the show was pulled before a second episode could air. Some viewers today see it as misunderstood, even ahead of its time. One episode. That is all it took to become a television ghost story. It is not just forgotten, it is buried, a broadcast that collapsed in real time. This one did not need a script. An American Family was the first of its kind, a raw, unscripted look into the real life of a real family, the Louds. And America was not ready. When it aired in 1973, it shattered every idea we had about what family television meant. This was not fiction. This was not safe. The Loud family fought, cried, broke down on camera. We watched a marriage fall apart. We saw a son come out as gay on national television at a time when even saying the word was taboo. Viewers were shocked, some were angry, others felt seen for the first time. The Louds were not perfect, and that was the point. This was a mirror held up to the nation, and not everyone liked what they saw. The show only aired once, in a 13-part documentary format, but its ripples never stopped. It inspired decades of reality television, but none captured the raw honesty of this one. An American Family vanished not because it failed, but because it told the truth. A truth that television, and maybe the country itself, was not yet ready to hear. Watching it now is like opening an old wound. You see how far we have come, but also how far we have not. The Louds were just a family, but they were also a revolution. Dana Plato was America's big sister. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she brought heart, warmth, and grace to a sitcom that dared to tackle hard truths. She smiled through the screen like someone who had it all together, but the truth behind her eyes told a different story. Fame came quickly, too quickly, and it never taught her how to hold on to herself. After Different Strokes, the offers stopped. The industry moved on. Dana did not. She fought hard to stay relevant, to find herself in a world that had already moved past her. Her choices became more desperate. She posed for tabloids, took roles she would rather forget. And all the while, the girl who once made us laugh was slowly unraveling. Addiction wrapped around her like a shadow she could not shake. She tried to get clean, tried to come back. But the pressure of being famous and forgotten is its own kind of poison. By 34, Dana Plato was gone. A tragic overdose ended her life, and with it, a chapter of television history that still feels unfinished. She died just a day after telling a radio show she was finally turning things around. We like to believe child stars live charmed lives. Dana reminded us that charm can be a mask, that behind every laugh track there might be a cry for help we cannot hear. Her story is not just a cautionary tale, it is a heartbreak that never quite stopped echoing. The Bigelow Theater was one of those brief glimmers in television history that seemed to burn too brightly and too fast. Airing from 1950 to 1951, it lived a strange dual life, first as a CBS anthology drama and later repackaged for Dumont under various names. At its core, it was a stage for stories, real ones, deep ones, sometimes even a little too ambitious for their times. Each episode was a self-contained play, complete with rising tension and dramatic conclusions that tried to stretch the television format beyond its early limits. But here's what sets it apart: the talent it attracted. A young James Dean appeared on it before he became legend. George C. Scott showed up long before anyone called him iconic. For one brief, shining moment, the Bigelow Theater was a springboard for greatness. It was the kind of show that didn't just cast actors, it captured them at the edge of becoming icons. There was a rawness in the performances, a feeling that no one quite knew they were making history. Every episode felt like a rehearsal for something much bigger, but no less sincere. And because of that, it became a quiet archive of American talent right before it exploded. But it never quite caught the public's imagination in the way its network hoped. It lacked flash. It asked its viewers to pay attention, to feel something. That was a lot to ask from a post-war America that just wanted to laugh or sing. And so it faded, quietly, almost politely, into television's attic of forgotten names. But those performances, those early, trembling moments of greatness, they remain buried in dusty kinescopes, just waiting for someone to remember. "You're under arrest, sugar." That was the catchphrase that made America sit up and take notice, if only briefly. Get Christie Love was revolutionary in its time, featuring one of television's first black female leads in a crime drama. Teresa Graves starred as Christie Love, an undercover detective in a world that was still figuring out how to talk about race, power, and gender. She was smart, tough, stylish, and unforgettable. The show was based loosely on a made-for-television movie, which drew major buzz. ABC thought they had the next big hit on their hands, and for a moment, it seemed like they did. But then the cracks began to show. The scripts were formulaic, the action routine, and the production values limited. Christie Love was meant to be bold, but the stories rarely let her break out of tired cliches. Behind the scenes, Graves, who had converted to a religious faith, refused to participate in any scenes she felt were too violent or provocative. Creative clashes followed. The network struggled to find the right tone. Ratings dipped, and by the end of its first season, the show was gone. What should have been a trailblazer was reduced to a footnote. Still, Christie Love carved out a place in history. She opened a door that had been shut for too long, even if she did not get to walk all the way through it. Today, she is remembered more for what she represented than for the plots she solved. A symbol of potential unrealized, a legend born from a show that never had the chance to grow. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, that was exactly what made it so rich. Amanda Bynes made us laugh when laughter felt simple. From All That to The Amanda Show, she carried an entire generation's sense of humor on her back. She was magnetic, quick, sharp, and brilliantly expressive. For every child of the late 90s and early 2000s, Amanda was not just a star, she was the moment. And then, one day, the smiles stopped coming. The world watched as Amanda's story began to shift. Headlines replaced punchlines. Her brilliance began unraveling in front of millions. Social media, paparazzi, cruel late-night jokes, it all became part of her unraveling. Mental health challenges took center stage, and the industry that once cheered for her now seemed to look away. But Amanda never gave up. She stepped out of the spotlight and into treatment. She focused on healing, on education, even enrolling in fashion school. She spoke about her struggles with painful honesty, never pretending things were easier than they were. It was raw, it was heartbreaking, and it was real. Today, she keeps a low profile, trying to rebuild something private and safe. The child who once lit up screens is now simply trying to find peace. And maybe that is the bravest role of all, not the comeback, but the quiet. Amanda Bynes may have vanished from our screens, but she never stopped mattering. Baywatch Nights was a spin-off that should have never worked, and in the end, it didn't. Airing from 1995 to 1997, it began as a detective drama starring David Hasselhoff's character from Baywatch, now moonlighting as a private investigator. But somewhere along the way, someone had a wild idea. What if it was supernatural? By its second season, the show had shifted into full X-Files territory, with Hasselhoff chasing ghosts, sea monsters, and other unexplainable threats under the moonlight. The tone was bizarre, the writing even more so. And while Baywatch thrived on sun and surf, Baywatch Nights traded it for fog machines and fear. Audiences were baffled. There were alien conspiracies, demon possessions, and episodes that felt like fever dreams. It was less a spin-off and more a genre-bending experiment in identity crisis. But hidden inside that chaos was a wild kind of courage, to throw everything safe away and start again. The camp factor went through the roof, but without the self-awareness to pull it off. Still, it tried. It tried to be different, to evolve, to turn a sun-soaked brand into something shadowy and strange. But that leap was too big. Ratings plummeted, and by 1997, it was quietly canceled, swallowed by the very darkness it tried to explore. Today, it exists more as trivia than memory, a weird side note in the legacy of one of the most watched shows in television history. But there's something oddly admirable about it. It dared to transform, to chase the unknown. And even if it stumbled, it did so with conviction. It was bold, too bold maybe. Hot L Baltimore came from Norman Lear, the mastermind behind groundbreaking hits like All in the Family and Maude. Based on a stage play by Lanford Wilson, the show was set in a rundown hotel filled with outcasts, dreamers, and people society had quietly ignored. Prostitutes, illegal immigrants, transients, they all called the hotel home. And that was exactly the problem. In a time when primetime television was still finding its nerve, Hot L Baltimore pushed the line so far forward that many stations refused to air it at all. The show tackled sex, poverty, racism, and identity, topics that were still taboo even by Lear's fearless standards. There was no laugh track to soften the edges, just conversations that felt uncomfortably real. Critics were split. Some praised it as raw and unflinching. Others found it too confrontational. And while Lear had managed to make controversy work in the past, this time the balance tipped. Viewers were unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, cry, or change the channel. Ratings were modest. Affiliate pushback was fierce. After just 13 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. Hot L Baltimore was gone. But it left a mark. It showed just how hard television had to fight to reflect real life, and how easy it was for something honest to be labeled too dangerous. Today, the show is rarely mentioned, but it remains a reminder that bravery on screen often pays the price first. This show did not just imagine superpowers, it made you feel like they might happen to you next. The secret world of Alex Mack was every middle schooler's fantasy wrapped in a denim jacket and a bucket hat. When a normal girl named Alex is accidentally doused in a mysterious chemical, she gains powers. She can move things with her mind, shoot electricity from her fingers, and even melt into a puddle. But this was not some glossy superhero tale. Alex did not become famous or powerful. She became hunted, and afraid, and different. The show was about more than abilities. It was about the isolation of adolescence, about hiding who you are because the world is not ready, about balancing science homework with secret identities, friendship with fear. Alex was smart, brave, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her world was not filled with capes and explosions, but with skateboards, lockers, and the quiet terror of being discovered. There were corporations chasing her, best friends protecting her, and parents who had no idea what she was going through. That made it real. That made it hurt. The show resonated because it never glamorized its concept. It treated being special as a burden. And for kids feeling weird or out of place, that message was everything. When it ended after 4 seasons, it left behind more than a cliffhanger. It left behind a community of viewers who still wonder what happened to Alex and whether there is still magic hiding just beneath the surface of a normal life. Lisa Jakub was the girl you could believe in. The rebellious daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire, the panicked teen in Independence Day. She had a rare kind of authenticity that made every character feel personal. She was never the loudest in the room. She was the realist. But sometimes the realest ones are the first to realize that something is wrong. Lisa's exit from Hollywood was not a scandal. It was a quiet refusal, a soft rebellion, a truth spoken out loud. By age 14, she was told she could not return to her school because filming conflicted with attendance. Robin Williams even wrote a letter to try to help her stay. But the message was clear. Being an actor meant choosing performance over personhood. Lisa never forgot that. The dissonance between who she was and who she was paid to be grew louder with every role. Eventually, she chose to leave. She moved away from the industry toward a life that made more sense. Writing, advocating, healing. Like Mara Wilson, Lisa began to speak openly about anxiety, trauma, and the quiet devastation of child fame. Her memoir, You Look Like That Girl, does not glamorize the past. It reclaims it. It turns a fading spotlight into a candle, gentle, true, and still burning. We remember her face from film, but it is her voice in print that lingers longer now. And maybe that is the story beneath the story, that sometimes disappearing is not vanishing. It is transforming. It is taking your own name back. The Texas Wheelers was a sitcom that aired for a blink in time, just 4 episodes in 1974 before it disappeared from the airwaves. It told the story of a widowed father, Zach Wheeler, played by Jack Elam, trying to raise his 4 kids in rural Texas after returning home. The tone was rough around the edges but warm at the core, an unusual blend of grit and sentiment. One of the kids was played by a young Mark Hamill just before the world would know him as Luke Skywalker. But even that bit of trivia was not enough to save the show. It premiered during a time when audiences were craving escapism, not slice-of-life realism wrapped in Southern grit. The laugh track felt out of place. The characters talked more than they joked. There was a quiet honesty in every scene, moments that felt like they came from someone's real life, not a writer's room. The show made no effort to dazzle or distract. It just wanted to sit with you and tell the truth. It was less about punchlines and more about pauses, silences, and hard-earned smiles. And instead of punchlines, there were long, quiet moments of reflection. Maybe too many. The Texas Wheelers did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was honest. And in 1974, honest sitcoms did not get very far. But those who remember it remember something rare. A network show that tried to say something deeper under its dusty boots and denim jackets. It had an emotional backbone. It wanted to show how family bonds are messy, complicated, and not always tied together with a neat bow. Its cancellation felt like closing the book before the first chapter was over. Yet in those few episodes, there was something sincere, something that lingers, the kind of sincerity that could only be appreciated years later. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, Critics admired Feldman's genius but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the comedy machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. If one of these stars brought back a memory, share it below, like the video, and subscribe to uncover more lost stories.